Before we begin today's episode, I want to address some items up front. Few topics in American public discourse are more difficult to discuss than the Israeli-Palestine conflict. Families divide over it. Friendships end. Careers are destroyed. People who agree on nearly everything else find themselves unable to speak to one another when this subject arises. And then sadly for everyone, the dialogue ends. I've thought a lot about this, and I've thought carefully about why this is. What I've concluded is that much of this difficulty stems not from ancient religious disputes, though those do exist, but rather from contemporary political calculations that benefit from our division. The current conflict is not primarily a battle between Judaism and Islam, stretching back 1,000 years. It is the consequence of decisions made by specific political actors in the 20th and 21st centuries. Decisions, then, that can be researched, documented, and analyzed. On this podcast, we critique political actors and their policies. We do not critique religion or ethnicities. Racism and bigotry are always short-sighted. They themselves are a form of propaganda designed to prevent the intellectual growth that comes from understanding how specific actions lead to specific consequences. The critiques in this episode are based on research and verified reporting. We cite our sources, we present data, we acknowledge when numbers are disputed and by whom. There is tremendous propaganda on all sides of this conflict. Tremendous. This makes it genuinely difficult to ascertain facts, but difficulty is not impossibility. And the attempt to understand, even imperfectly, is better than the refusal to try. Our aim, as always, is to trace how we arrived at the present moment, to understand the choices that were made, by whom, and with what consequence. To ask whether American policy serves American interests, and whether it leaves Americans more free or more governed. Personally, I feel I have no natural biases in this dispute, other than that I have a vested interest in the well-being of humanity, as we all should, and that I aim to understand what is best for my family, for my community, and then the broader society I'm a part of and whose laws I'm governed by. I am an American. I am a Christian, and for what that's worth, I am a Gen Xer who grew up in the age of the 80s, in the waning years of the Cold War, and is shaped by trying to understand the irrational decisions that might have led us to nuclear war, aka mutually assured destruction. I want to understand the root of conflict so that I can be more resolved to help reasonable people without such irrational behavior or any innocent lives lost. I have an interest in economic stability, but most of all in liberty and freedom, because I believe that to be a natural right for all peoples. I say this to give you perspective on my biases you may perceive that I have. I abhor generalization of grievances based on something as simplistic as race or ethnicity, because I believe people operate in individual self-interest, not in some monolithic groupthink, and each person should be judged on their individual choices. I also understand not everyone thinks this way. Racism, anti-Semitism, cultural biases do exist. Other peoples who have grown up under the threat of violence or subjugation have a different baseline of values and motivations, as do those actors, agencies, and political operatives who use those biases to foment hate, create distraction and distrust with propaganda. And thus, when we look to news stories or sources for facts, It is best to do so with eyes open, understanding as much as possible about the motivation of the author, the publication, who funds and promotes those sources, and why. In today's episode, I will cite numbers, death tolls, bombings, attacks, etc. And I will cite sources. Some of those sources will have clear ties to Hamas or to Israeli intelligence. However, I will look to where they are verified by the opposing interest group as well. I'll do this in order to try and draw some understanding of their authenticity. Lastly, whether this episode reaches 10,000, or 10 million people, I have designed this to build a position that is defensible with my closest friends. Therefore, it is true to my beliefs and my understanding that has evolved over the years with a purposeful analysis, with purposeful research, and lived experience. Hopefully, this may help others as they contemplate these difficult issues for themselves. So, enjoy the episode.
Welcome to the Consequential Actions podcast, where we aim to learn how history impacts current events and affects our lives today through the lens of politics, the economy, technology, and business trends. I may be an AI, but your host, well, he is not artificial in any way. Here is Jeff Kellick.
From the river to the sea. When Palestine protesters chant these words on American university campuses, they are accused of calling for genocide, for the elimination of Jewish people from the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. Universities suspend students. Visa holders face deportation. The phrase itself is treated as evidence of murderous intent. On January 28, 2026, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu used the same geographic reference. He said, Israel will maintain security control over the entire area from the Jordan River to the sea. And that applies to the Gaza Strip as well. The same words, the same geography, opposite speakers, opposite interpretations. When Palestinians say from the river to the sea, it is genocide. When the Israeli Prime Minister says it, it is security. How did we arrive at a place where the same phrase means liberation to one side and extermination to the other? Where the same geography is simultaneously the site of an indigenous homeland and a security perimeter? Where 90% of a population can be dismissed as non-Jewish communities in a single sentence, and that sentence can shape a century. The answer does not lie in ancient scripture. It does not require excavating the battles of biblical kings or the conquests of medieval caliphs. The answer lies in decisions made between 1916 and 1922, in secret agreements signed in wartime, in a 67-word letter from a British foreign secretary to a Zionist leader, in the explicit, documented calculation that the wishes of 700,000 people were less important than the hopes of 60,000. And the answer lies in what happened when one empire made promises it could not keep, and another empire inherited every contradiction. Today, we examine the contemporary consequences of those decisions, the ceasefire that is not a ceasefire, the reconstruction that may be controlled by another name, and the annexation that dares not speak its name. The American entanglement, they cost billions. And returns? What exactly? This is the story that the present inherits from the past. This is the story that Americans must understand. Because we are paying for it. In treasure, in reputation, in security. And our children will inherit its consequences. I am Jeff Kellick, and this is the Consequential Actions Podcast. This is episode 6, part B, a contemporary application episode corresponding to Article 6 of the series, Empire of Liberty, America's Foreign Entanglements, from the Founders to the Forever Wars. In our Saturday episode, we examined how the modern Middle East was created. The secret Sykes-Picot Agreement, the contradictory Hussein-McMahon correspondence, the Balfour Declaration with its built-in impossibilities. We traced how T.E. Lawrence knowingly served a fraud, how peoples who fought for independence found themselves treated like property, and how borders, drawn by men who never walked those streets, have shaped a century of conflict. Today, we apply that history to current events. We examine Gaza under a ceasefire that has killed nearly 600 Palestinians since October. We examine the Board of Peace and the Kushner vision for reconstruction. We examine the West Bank's accelerating annexation. And we ask the question that the founders would have asked. What is the American interest here? And does this policy serve it? As always, this podcast expands on themes from the article and applies them to the present moment. Let us begin. To understand what is happening in Gaza and the West Bank, we must understand what was said explicitly in writing by the men who made these decisions over a century ago. The Balfour Declaration of November 2nd, 1917 is 67 words. Let me read the operative portion. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. Note the language carefully. The Jewish people are named. They are to receive a national home. The Arabs, who constituted approximately 90% of the population, are not named. They are existing non-Jewish communities. They are defined by what they are not. And they are promised protection of civil and religious rights, not political rights, not the right to self-determination, not sovereignty, civil and religious rights, the rights of a minority tolerated within someone else's state. But we do not need to infer Arthur Balfour's intentions. He wrote them down. In 1919, Balfour sent a memorandum to Lord Curzon, his successor as Foreign Secretary, and in it he wrote, and I quote directly, "The weak point of our position is, of course, that in the case of Palestine, we deliberately and rightly decline to accept the principle of self-determination." Let those words settle. Deliberately and rightly decline to accept the principle of self-determination. It was not an oversight. It was policy. Balfour continued, "In Palestine, we do not propose even to go through the form of consulting the wishes of the present inhabitants of the country. Zionism, be it right or wrong, good or bad, is rooted in age-long traditions, in present needs, in future hopes, a far profounder import than the desires and prejudices of the 700,000 Arabs who now inhabit that ancient land." There it is, in his own words. The wishes of 700,000 people, 90% of the population, were desires and prejudices. They were not to be consulted. Not even the form of consultation was to be observed. Let us be precise about what Balfour was dismissing. At the time of the declaration in 1917, the population of Palestine was approximately 700,000 Arabs, both Muslim and Christian, and approximately 60,000 Jews. The ratio was more than 11 to 1. The Jewish population constituted less than 10% of the whole. By the British census of 1922, the proportions were similar. Approximately 590,000 Muslims, 83,000 Jews, 71,000 Christians. The declaration promised a national home for 10% of the population while assuring that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of the other 90%. This was not a hopeful aspiration that proved difficult in practice. It was a mathematical impossibility written into the document from the beginning. As the writer, Arthur Koestler, later observed, one nation solemnly promised to a second nation the country of a third. Now, there was one attempt to ask the inhabitants what they wanted. In 1919, at the Paris Peace Conference, President Woodrow Wilson, committed to his principle of self-determination, commissioned two Americans, Henry Churchill King and Charles Crane, to survey all the populations of the former Ottoman territories within that region and report their wishes. The King-Crane Commission traveled throughout the region. They spoke to delegations, they gathered petitions, they listened. Their report, submitted in August 1919, was unequivocal. The population of Palestine overwhelmingly opposed unlimited Jewish immigration and the Zionist program. The commission recommended that the Zionist program be greatly reduced and that Palestine not become a Jewish state. The report was suppressed. It was not published until 1922, and by that time, the mandate had assigned to Britain and the policy was set. Balfour, as we have seen, explicitly rejected Wilson's approach. In Palestine, he declared, we do not propose even to go through the form of consulting the wishes of the present inhabitants of the country. This was not ancient history. This was the time period when my grandparents were born. This was 1919. The decisions that created the modern Middle East were made within living memory, and their consequences continue to unfold on our screens today. On October 10th, 2025, a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas took effect. It was brokered by the United States as part of President Trump's 20-point comprehensive plan for Gaza. The word ceasefire implies a cessation of fire, a pause in killing, an end, however temporary, to violence. Let us examine what actually occurred. According to the Gaza government media office, as reported by Al Jazeera on February 10, 2026, Israeli forces have violated the ceasefire agreement at least 1,620 times from October 10, 2025 to February 10, 2026. These violations include 749 bombings and shellings, 560 instances of shooting at civilians, 79 raids into residential areas beyond the yellow line, 232 demolitions of properties, and 50 detentions of Palestinians from Gaza. According to the Gaza Ministry of Health, as reported by Al Jazeera, at least 586 Palestinians have been killed since the ceasefire was signed. Let me repeat that number. 586 people killed during a ceasefire in 4 months. The total death toll since October 7th, 2023, according to the Gaza Ministry of Health as of February 2026, is at least 72,037 Palestinians, including more than 20,000 children. On February 4th, 2026, Israeli strikes across Gaza killed at least 19 Palestinians, most of them women and children. This was according to NPR and the Times of Israel. The dead included a 10-day-old infant, a 5-month-old baby, their parents, and their grandmother. Israel stated it was responding to a militant attack on Israeli soldiers that seriously wounded one reservist. Israel called this a violation of the ceasefire by Hamas. An Israeli military official speaking to the Associated Press said Israel would continue striking Gaza. On February 4th, 2026, the IDF issued an evacuation warning for a residential building in Gaza City, the first such warning since the ceasefire began, and then struck what it described as a Hamas arms depot. According to Democracy Now!, reporting on February 10th, 2026, 4 people were killed when Israeli forces bombed a residential building sheltering displaced people in Gaza City. In fairness, we also need to present the Israeli position. According to the Foundation for Defense of Democracy's Long War Journal, Palestinian groups have violated the ceasefire 99 times since October 2025, including 10 violations between January 22nd and February 4th, 2026. The IDF reports that militants have crossed the yellow line, the demarcation between Hamas-held territory and Israeli-controlled territory, planted explosive devices, and approached Israeli troops in threatening manners. Israel contends that its strikes are responses to these violations, not initiations of violence. This is where the fog of war and the fog of propaganda become thickest. Both sides claim the other is violating the ceasefire. Both sides cite incidents. Both sides present themselves as responding, not initiating. We can say, with certainty, is this: 586 Palestinians have died during a ceasefire. Whether each death was a violation, a response to a violation, or something else entirely depends on whose account you accept. What we can also say is this: the power disparity is vast. Israel possesses one of the world's most advanced militaries, supplied with American weapons. Hamas possesses small arms, rockets, and tunnels. In this period of time, since this ceasefire, when Israel responds, dozens to hundreds die. When Hamas responds, soldiers are wounded or approached in a threatening manner. The numbers do not lie, even when their interpretation is contested. The ceasefire agreement stipulated that full aid will be immediately sent into the Gaza Strip. According to the Gaza Media Office, from October 10, 2025 to February 10, 2026, only 31,178 trucks entered Gaza out of 72,000 allocated. 43% of what was promised, averaging 260 trucks per day. According to reporting by antiwar.com, on February 1st, 2026, Israeli authorities have ordered Doctors Without Borders, MSF, in French that means Médecins Sans Frontières, or Medicine Without Borders, Frontiers, to cease all operations in Gaza by February 28th. Israel demands that MSF turn over the identities of its Palestinian staff. MSF has refused, citing safety concerns for its employees. MSF stated, "This is a pretext to obstruct humanitarian assistance. Israeli authorities are forcing humanitarian organizations into an impossible choice between exposing staff to risk or interrupting critical medical care for people in desperate need." According to MSF, in 2025 alone, the organization treated more than 100,000 severe injuries, performed 22,700 surgeries, conducted nearly 800,000 medical consultations, assisted in over 10,000 births, and provided tens of thousands of psychological support sessions. All this may end on February 28th. Here's what the numbers tell us, regardless of which side's narrative you accept. A ceasefire was signed. Since it was signed, 586 Palestinians have died. Aid flows at less than half the promised rate. The major international medical organization is being forced out. Israeli military operations continue daily. When is a ceasefire not a ceasefire? At the World Economic Forum in Davos in January 2026, Jared Kushner, President Trump's son-in-law, real estate investor, and Gaza peace negotiator, unveiled what he called the master plan for rebuilding Gaza. The presentation included slides, renderings, conceptual art, 170 skyscrapers lining the coast, luxury hotels, waterfront tourism, data centers, advanced manufacturing. Gaza, as President Trump's been saying, has amazing potential, Kushner said. This is for the people of Gaza. Let us be clear about what must be rebuilt. According to the United Nations Development Program, as of late 2025, approximately 84 to 92% of Gaza has been destroyed. According to the World Bank, European Union, and the United Nations Joint Assessment released in February 2025, the estimated physical damage to Gaza's infrastructure is approximately $30 billion. Total recovery costs, including economic losses, exceed $53 billion. The Gaza Government Media Office places losses higher, over $70 billion. There are an estimated 61 million tons of rubble to clear. The UNDP estimates this will take at least 70 years under ideal conditions. And 30% of munitions dropped on Gaza have not exploded. The UN Mine Action Service estimates 7,500 tons of unexploded ordnances remain scattered across the territory. Clearing just those could take 14 years. And beneath the rubble lie bodies. Thousands of missing persons presumed dead, whose remains must be exhumed before construction can begin. The UN Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, projects that at current growth rates, Gaza's GDP will not return to 2022 levels until 2092. 2092. 66 years from now. My grandchildren, if I'm blessed to have them, may live to see it.
I warned against entangling alliances. They did not listen. Now you can trace exactly how it happened.
The Consequential Actions podcast is on YouTube. Subscribe and follow each series from the very beginning. Principled debate requires participation. Like the episodes. Leave a comment. Join the discussion.
Every series is organized as a playlist, from General Welfare to The New Leviathan to Empire of Liberty. Begin at the beginning.
Into this devastation steps President Trump's Board of Peace. The board was established at Davos in January 22nd, 2026, and according to its charter, it is an international organization that seeks to promote stability, restore dependable and lawful governance, and secure enduring peace in areas affected or threatened by conflict. Note that the charter does not mention Gaza. The board is chaired by President Trump, who holds sole veto power over its decisions. To become a permanent member, countries must pay $1 billion. As of mid-February 2026, 27 countries have signed the charter. Major Western allies, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, Italy, Norway, Sweden, have declined to join. France has stated the board raises serious questions regarding the principles and structure of the United Nations. An analysis published by Al Jazeera on February 8th, 2026, examined what reconstruction in Gaza might actually mean. Researcher Ihab Jabarhin, quoted in the article, stated, "Reconstruction is not the day after the war. It is the continuation of war by bureaucratic and economic means." The analysis identified three forms of what it called extortion. First, security extortion, linking the flow of construction materials to surveillance and control, creating permanent dependency. Second, political extortion, using reconstruction to determine who governs. As Jabrahim put it, whoever distributes the cement distributes the legitimacy. Third, pacification is extortion, turning the hope of shelter, a roof over one's head, into a reward for political compliance rather than a human right. Israeli Finance Minister Smotrich has stated there will be Jewish settlements in Gaza. Israeli Defense Minister Katz has stated that the Israeli occupation of Gaza will be permanent. Israeli Culture Minister Zohar has stated that Gaza is ours and that Palestinians there are guests who will leave. In episode 6, we discussed T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, who fought alongside the Arabs while knowing the promises made to them were fraudulent. Lawrence wrote in 7 Pillars of Wisdom, "I risked the fraud on my conviction that Arab help was necessary to our cheap and speedy victory in the East, and that better we win and break our word than lose." Today, who are the Lawrences? Who serves a policy they know to be contradictory? Who facilitates promises that cannot be kept? Who believes the ends justify the means, and that American interests are served by arrangements that benefit from Palestinian desperation? The imperial calculation has not changed. What Balfour said of the 700,000 Arabs in 1919, that their desires and prejudices were of lesser import, echoes in every arrangement that excludes Palestinian voices from Palestinian fate. The National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, the technocratic body established to govern Gaza, was created without meaningful Palestinian input. It reports to the Board of Peace. The board is chaired by President Trump. President Trump has sole veto authority. The people of Gaza will be administered. They will not govern themselves. This is not ancient history. This is February 2026. While the world focuses on Gaza, the West Bank is being transformed. On February 8th, 2026, 3 days before Prime Minister Netanyahu's meeting with President Trump, Israel's Security Cabinet approved a series of measures that critics describe as functional annexation. The measures include allowing Jewish Israelis to purchase West Bank land directly, without government approval, expanding Israeli enforcement powers into areas A and B of the West Bank. These are areas that were designated under the Oslo Accords as under Palestinian administrative control. And 3, transforming authority over building permits in Hebron from the Palestinian Authority to Israeli bodies. To understand what is being dismantled, we must understand what was first built. The Oslo Accords of the 1990s divided the West Bank into 3 zones. Area A, full Palestinian civil and security control, approximately 18% of the West Bank, including major cities. Area B, Palestinian civil control, Israeli security control. This is approximately 22% of the territory. And then Area C, full Israeli civil and security control. This is approximately 60% of the territory, including all Israeli settlements. This was intended as an interim arrangement, a stepping stone toward a final status agreement and Palestinian statehood. The Oslo framework has never been replaced. No final status agreement has been reached, and now Israel is unilaterally extending its authority into areas A and B, the zones that were supposed to remain under Palestinian control. Finance Minister Smotrich, announcing the measures, stated, "We are normalizing life in the territories, removing bureaucratic barriers, fighting for the land, and deepening our presence throughout the land of Israel." He added, "We will continue to extinguish the idea of a Palestinian state." The Yesha Council, which represents Israeli settlers, celebrated the decisions as the most important in 58 years and declared that the Israeli government is now stating in practice that the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. Haggit Ofron of Peace Now, the Israeli settlement watchdog, called the decision another way of saying it's normal life. It's not occupied territory. It's like part of Israel. 8 Muslim majority nations, including Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, the UAE, and Turkey, issued a joint statement condemning the measures as violations of international law intended to impose unlawful Israeli sovereignty. The European Union and United Nations voiced condemnation, calling the moves another step in the wrong direction with no legal validity. The International Court of Justice issued an advisory opinion in 2024 finding that Israel's policy in the West Bank amount to annexation and violate international law's prohibition on acquiring territory by force. And what if the United States? A White House official responding to the Israeli measures stated, "President Trump has clearly stated that he does not support Israel annexing the West Bank. A stable West Bank keeps Israel secure and is in line with the administration's goal to achieve peace in the region. President Trump, in an interview with Axios, stated, "I am against annexation. We have enough things to think about now. We do not need to be dealing with the West Bank." Note what is present and what is absent. The statement opposes annexation. It does not oppose settlement expansion. It does not oppose the specific measures approved by Israel's security cabinet. It does not threaten consequences. Israel is taking steps that critics describe as functional annexation. Annexation in practice without the formal declaration. And the American response is to reiterate opposition to formal annexation while taking no action against functional annexation. In 1917, Balfour promised that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. In 2026, that promise remains unfulfilled. The ICJ has ruled that Israeli policies violate international law. Israeli ministers openly state their intentions to extinguish the idea of a Palestinian state. And the United States, the guarantor of so many regional arrangements, states its opposition to annexation while watching annexation proceed. The founders understood that promises mean nothing without enforcement, that words without action are merely words, that treaties and declarations are only as good as the will to uphold them. What is the American will here? And what are we willing to enforce? What should America enforce or influence? On February 11th, 2026, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with President Trump at the White House. It was Netanyahu's sixth visit to the United States since Trump returned to office in January 2025. The meeting lasted approximately 2.5 hours. According to multiple reports, the primary topic was not Gaza, it was Iran. 5 days earlier, on February 6, 2026, American and Iranian officials held indirect talks in Muscat, Oman, the first considerable diplomatic engagement between the two countries in years. Both sides described the talks as a good start and agreed to continue. Netanyahu moved his Washington visit up by a full week after learning of the Oman talks. According to Israeli sources speaking to CNN, Netanyahu wanted to discuss potential military options against Iran. According to antiwar.com, one Israeli source told CNN that Israel wants to preserve the ability to attack the Islamic Republic even if an agreement is reached with the United States. What does Israel want from any negotiation with Iran? According to multiple analyses, Israel's demands include 1. Complete elimination of Iran's nuclear enrichment capability. 2. Elimination of Iranian ballistic missiles capable of reaching Israel. And 3. Elimination of Iranian support for Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. Iran has refused to discuss any of these topics. Tehran has indicated willingness only to discuss limits on nuclear enrichment, similar to the 2015 JCPOA agreement, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, aka the Iran nuclear deal. This is the one that Trump withdrew from in his first term. On February 12, 2026, political scientist John Mearsheimer appeared on Judging Freedom to discuss the Netanyahu-Trump meeting. His analysis, published on antiwar.com, made several observations. First, Trump appears to recognize the military force cannot achieve Israeli demands or topple the Iranian regime. Second, Trump has therefore been effectively forced to negotiate with Iran over limiting its nuclear enrichment capabilities, which infuriates Netanyahu. Third, it was clear after the meeting that it went badly for Israel. After the meeting, President Trump stated it was very good and that nothing definitive was reached, other than he insisted negotiations with Iran continue to see whether or not a deal can be consummated. Okay, so that's the recent events. Here's the pattern that we have traced through this series. An ally demands America's support for military action. The American president faces a choice between the allies' demands and a diplomatic alternative. The ally and domestic constituencies aligned with that ally pressure the president toward confrontation. We saw this pattern with Britain before World War I. We saw it with various allies throughout the Cold War. And we see it now with Israel and Iran. Mearsheimer concluded his analysis with this observation. What will happen now is that Israel firsters here in the U.S. will go to work to pressure Trump to launch an attack against Iran, even though it is not in the American national interest. The founders warned against passionate attachment to foreign nations. Washington's farewell address, which we examined in episode 1, cautioned that such attachments create the illusion of an imaginary common interest in cases where no real common interest exists. What is the American interest in a war with Iran? What would such a war cost? Who would pay that cost? And who would benefit? These are the questions our founders would ask. These are the questions we must ask. I began this episode by acknowledging the difficulty of discussing this topic. Let me return to that difficulty and suggest a way through it. There is tremendous propaganda on all sides of this conflict. From one direction, we are told that Israel faces an existential threat from terrorists who seek its destruction, that every military action is defensive, that civilian casualties are tragic but unavoidable, and that criticism of Israeli policy is anti-Semitism. From another direction, we are told that Israel is conducting genocide, that every Palestinian death is murder, that the Jewish state has no legitimacy, and that October 7th was justified resistance. Both narratives contain elements of truth. Both narratives contain distortions. And both narratives serve interest of the people who promote them. Ascertaining facts in this environment is genuinely difficult. The Gaza Ministry of Health is controlled by Hamas. Does that make its casualty figures unreliable? The United Nations, as multiple independent analyses have consistently found its records to be generally reliable. But generally reliable is not certainly accurate. The Israeli Defense Forces issue statements about military operations. Do those statements accurately describe what occurred? In some cases, yes. In other cases, subsequent investigations have revealed discrepancies. MSF, Doctors Without Borders, is being forced out of Gaza. Once they leave, who will verify conditions on the ground? Who will count the dead? According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, at least 248 journalists and media workers have been killed in Gaza since October 2023. When journalists are killed, verification becomes harder. When aid organizations are expelled, verification becomes harder. When the fog of war thickens, propaganda flourishes. This is why critical thinking matters. This is why we trace sources. This is why we present data with citations. This is why we acknowledge what we do not know alongside what we do. I promised myself that we would find optimism where possible. Let me try. First, public opinion is shifting. Polls consistently show that American sympathy for Palestinians has grown significantly since October 2023. The myth of indistinguishable interest between the United States and Israel, the assumption that what is good for Israel is automatically good for America, is cracking. People are asking questions they did not ask before. Second, principled bipartisan cooperation remains possible. We discussed in episode 5B the Massey-Kana effort on the Epstein files, a libertarian Republican and a progressive Democrat working together. Such cooperation can emerge on foreign policy as well, when representatives prioritize principle over party. Third, knowledge is a tool against propaganda. The more you understand how we arrived at the present moment, the specific decisions, the specific actors, the specific consequences, the harder it becomes to accept simplistic narratives. Learning how actions lead to consequences makes us more discerning about which sources to trust. And fourth, and perhaps most importantly, the founders gave us a framework for analysis that remains valid. They asked, does this policy serve American interest? They asked, does this entanglement make us more free or more governed? They asked, what are the consequences of passionate attachments to foreign nations? These questions do not tell us what the answer should be, but they tell us what questions to ask. And asking the right questions is the beginning of wisdom. 107 years ago, 67 words changed the course of history. Arthur Balfour promised a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. He promised that nothing would be done to prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities, the 90% of the population he declined even to consult. Both promises could not be kept. The contradiction was written into the document from the beginning, and we live with the consequences. The borders drawn by Sykes and Picot, the mandates imposed by Britain and France, the promises made and broken, the wars fought, the refugees created, the walls built, the settlements expanded, the children killed. All this flows from decisions made by specific people at specific moments for specific reasons. None of it was inevitable. All of it had alternatives. And all of it continues. This past Sunday, we published Article 7, America First, the Old Right and the Case Against Intervention. In this article, we examined the principled and bipartisan non-interventionist tradition in American history. The voices who opposed empire, who questioned entanglement, who asked whether foreign wars served American interest. On Saturday, the corresponding podcast episode will expand on those themes. I am Jeff Kellick, and this has been episode 6B of Empire of Liberty, America's Foreign Entanglements, from the founders to the forever wars, on the Consequential Actions podcast. If you have found value in this episode and want to follow the series, please subscribe to our Substack page at consequentialactions.com, where you will find all written articles, as well as our previous series on the General Welfare Clause and the New Leviathan. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Consequential Actions Podcast for video versions and all podcast episodes. And follow me on X at jkellick for updates, discussions, and announcements. We continue to post articles and welcome your participation. Until then, have a great day.